student success has to do with fostering the ability of every student to flourish and to maximize their potential so that they can leave the institution to pursue a life of meaning and purpose, which is going to be different for each student.
That was Suzanne Rivera, president of Macalester College. We had a great conversation about her unconventional path to the presidency and the great perspective that that affords. And we talked about questioning tradition to become more student-centered and create a true living learning community. I think you're going to really enjoy this. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Connected College podcast. I'm your host, Elliot Felix. I've helped more than 100 colleges and universities change what they offer, how they operate, and how they're organized to enable student success. And if you're a leader in higher ed and you think that the silos and separations get in the way of student success, then this podcast and my upcoming book, The Connected College, are for you. We're here to learn and work together to bust silos, question tradition, and forge partnerships so that students feel connected to their college, their community, their coursework, and their careers. I am delighted to have Dr. Suzanne Rivera here, who's the president of Macalester College here in Minnesota, to talk to us about the roles that presidents play in student success. Welcome, Suzanne.
Great. Thank you. Good to be with you, Elliot.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started in higher ed?
Sure, but I probably need to go a little bit further back. I took a crooked path to get here. I grew up in an immigrant family and immigrant community in New York City, and my family had very little means, and there was a lot of chaos when I was growing up. So even the idea of going to college was not a given. And then through a series of serendipitous events, I ended up being able to go on scholarship to a preparatory private high school and then on to an elite college with lots of scholarship money and a Pell Grant, where I really came to understand social class and social inequality in the United States. It was an incredible privilege to get that education, and it really opened my eyes about what might be possible. And I thought I wanted to go into social work after that. So then I went and got a master's degree in social work and thought I wanted to do that. Ended up getting nominated by my dean to go into federal government to do anti-poverty work. I worked in the Head Start program. And it was quite by accident that after I married and already had a child, that my spouse decided to go back and get his PhD. And I just needed a job to support the family while he was studying. And I got a job at the university where he was getting his doctorate, thinking that was a job of convenience. But what happened was that I discovered I loved it. I loved being back on a college campus. I loved the youthful exuberance of students. I loved being part of a community of learners and thinkers. It reminded me of everything I loved from my own undergraduate experience. And I thought, oh, this is actually where I belong, in making opportunities like this available for other people, in idea generation, in supporting scholarship and discovery. All of that stuff just really appealed to me. Plus, it appealed to my sense that I love being a perpetual student. So working in higher education allows me to keep learning, which I love. My boss, who was a Nobel laureate, literally said to me, "You're great, but you can't go any farther than X level unless you go back to school and get an MD or a PhD, because it doesn't matter how talented you are. Degrees are the coin of the realm in higher education." And I think he
Right.
knew a little bit about my personality and that I would take that as a challenge. And I went out and enrolled in a night program for a PhD when I was 35, working full time and had 2 kids in elementary school. So this is not the common path that people take to get to the college presidency. I didn't become an assistant professor till age 40, at which point I already was a vice president on the administrative side of things. And then I got a faculty appointment and began to embark on my own original scholarship and research, getting grants, writing journal articles, co-editing a book. And I was a college president by age 50. A very unusual way for me to arrive at this role. But what's cool about it is that I arrived here having been a member of every single constituency in higher ed. I had been a student, I had been an alum, an involved alum. I had been on the staff side, I had been in the faculty side, I had been in the administration, and I had been the parent of a college student.
That must give you such great perspective.
It really does. So when I'm making decisions or I'm thinking about a problem, I really put myself in the shoes of each of the constituencies of the institution and think about how will this play out? How will it be perceived? What will be the criticisms? Who will it help? Who will it hurt? Whose voices are we leaving out of the conversation? So I'm sorry I couldn't give you like a more succinct answer, but my road to the presidency was an unusual one.
Yeah, I think sometimes curved paths and meandering paths are the most interesting ones in terms of all the scenery and everything you learn along the
Yeah.
way. So I love that. I love an uncommon path so that you can be an uncommon president and have the empathy and the perspective to lead in a time of change. It's really inspiring. You talked about all these different perspectives you bring and experiences you've had. And I think it takes all those different perspectives, alumni, parents, faculty, staff, students, administration, to enable student success. And I would love to hear how you define it. How do you define student success?
I think that there's a short answer and a longer answer to that. The short answer is that for me, student success has to do with fostering the ability of every student to flourish and to maximize their potential so that they can leave the institution to pursue a life of meaning and purpose, which is going to be different for each student. Their potential is different. The gifts and talents they bring are different. The limitations and obstacles they've overcome are different. Their idea of what a meaningful life of purpose varies. So in order to be a place where every student can flourish, a college or university needs to be actively, intentionally working on creating an environment that is not just inclusive. Here's the table, and we're going to let a few people in who were not who the table was meant for, but we're going to let them sit at it. I think that's an old-fashioned way of thinking of inclusion.
Yeah.
I've been thinking more about it this way. We sometimes use the word belonging in one sense of the word that has to do with saying you belong here. Like you, Elliot, come to Macalester and you belong to Macalester now.
I would love to come to Macalester.
We'd love to have you. But I've been thinking about the word belonging in the other sense lately. Elliot, if you come to Macalester, Macalester belongs to you. You have an ownership stake in this place. It belongs to you. You transform it by your presence here. So every new crop of students we bring in change the place by their belongingness within this institution, which means instead of asking questions like, are students ready for college? We need to be thinking more, are we ready for students? Are we ready to support each student in their own journey to flourishing so that they can leave here equipped with the tools to have a meaningful and purposeful life?
Maximize your potential and lead a life of meaning and purpose, I think, is a wonderfully high bar and a great challenge for us to set for ourselves to help students meet or exceed. And I love the idea of thinking about flipping belonging and really emphasizing the fact that students take ownership over their experience. I'm biased because that was like the thesis of my book, How to Get the Most Out of College. But the idea that it's constantly shaped and reshaped by who's at the institution and what are they doing and what are they striving for. And so I'm curious, you bring these different perspectives and lived experience and empathy and this, I think, great way of thinking about belonging. What do you see your role as in terms of a college president, in terms of enabling student success? Like, how do you make it happen to actually have the flourishing and the potential and the purpose?
This is going to sound really corny, but
Corny's great.
I talk a lot about virtues in my job and I talk a lot about love. Like I deeply love our students. I deeply love learning and ideas. And I think first we have to love the students. So when I think about what role a college president can play, I really try to show up for our students, meaning if I'm not on the road raising money for this place to support our students, which is an expression of love, by the way, all of that road time is me trying to get the resources to give them the best experience we possibly can. But when I'm here, I try to show that love by showing up for them. And I'm not infantilizing them when I say much like a parent showing up means a lot to a child. I think leaders on a college campus show their love for students by being there, going to the basketball game, going to the poetry slam, going to the religious worship service, walking through the library and giving out donuts. There are ways in which my presence brings the imprimatur of the college and demonstrates to the students that we genuinely care about them.
Yeah.
That's number one.
Leading with your presence and loving your students.
Yeah.
And
It's a little bit fraught. I have to be honest with you. It's a little bit fraught because I'm the first woman president here. And one thing I've noticed is that if you lead with love, people don't take you as seriously. And
yeah,
it calls into question how authoritative you can be if you're talking about virtues like kindness.
yeah, where are your facts? Where are your
Yeah.
numbers?
I push back on that a lot. I think it's possible to be really capable and kind at the same time.
Yeah.
It's a weird aspect of our culture that we think leaders who are kind must be weak somehow or lack authority.
Michael Sorrell at Paul Quinn has this wonderful quote, which you talked about being ready for students as opposed to students being ready for you. He has this quote, you have to love your students more than you love your traditions.
Yes,
And
that's great.
that's always resonated with me. So it starts with loving your students and showing your love with your presence, leading by example. I don't know another way to lead, by the way, but what's number 2?
I think that where you put your resources, like your budget and the choices you make about what to invest in on a campus, say a lot about the extent to which you value students and are fostering their success. So if we're making decisions that are mostly about the convenience of faculty and staff, which is not to say that caring about employee well-being isn't important. It is absolutely important. But I think if we look at where we invest the college's resources, says a lot about whether we're putting student success at the center of our work. So another way that I can play a role in student success is refocusing conversations about resource deployment and focus of our attention on the student experience. There are a lot of ways of thinking about this. Coming back to the Paul Quinn quote, so much of the academy is bound up in habits and traditions.
Right.
It's ironic, it's paradoxical because colleges and universities think of themselves as the seat of innovation, which is true. We are pushing boundaries intellectually, we're making discoveries and inventions, but also it's very tradition bound, formed around habits. Even things like academic departments are really just medieval guilds that vestigial medieval guilds have maintained identities over time, but there isn't really a reason why we have to be organized in the way we are, other than that it's habitual and that the training process for PhDs, which is who mostly makes up the professoriate, is about inculcating values and training on these traditions such that they replicate themselves over time, whether or not they are the best habits for student success. So I think another thing that I can do as a leader is to gently and with respect question our habits and traditions and ask, should we still be doing this? What else should we be doing? Are there things we ought to do differently or do more of because it would be better for students? And then I think maybe the last thing I would say is creating conditions at the institution that allow for every kind of expression of a student's talent or interests, which is really hard. It's like the American experiment, which is a work in progress and we don't always get it right. A school like Macalester, which is very not only national but international, like 18% of our students are from outside the US. We have over 100 countries represented among our 2,100 students. Only 14% of our students come from the state of Minnesota. So it's a really diverse group in terms of lived experience, faith tradition, race and ethnicity, gender expression, faith tradition, every way imaginable. So if you create intentionally a very diverse community, of course, we're not always going to agree. So you have to create conditions in which people can coexist with a sense of unity and shared purpose to be a living learning community without rancor, even when we don't agree. And providing those tools, I think, is an important thing that a leader can do also. And being a model of that, right? Students need to be able to see me disagree courteously with my peers or disagree courteously with students, listen to them with love, but not always agree with them, and then be honest with them about why, so that they are equipped with the tools to go into the world and disagree with people courteously also.
I love that. And I think thinking about the role that the president can play in asking questions and creating conditions and resource allocation, in addition to starting from a place of love, is also a tall order. And I know so much is changing about being a college president. I'd love to hear your take on that. I know that American Council on Education report showing that tenure is shrinking, and it's
And it's a year less for women than it is for men, by the way.
wow. So maybe that's the first thing, is that it's the job is getting harder and as a result shorter. But what do you see as the big changes that are facing college presidents into the future?
Bear in mind that I started this job June 1st of 2020, which was quite possibly
Yeah.
the most challenging conditions under which someone could undertake this
Yeah.
kind of responsibility. Not just because it was high COVID. That was the phase of COVID where we didn't yet have a vaccine. We didn't even know how the disease spread. We were still wiping off our groceries before bringing them in the house. And
Yeah. I remember we moved to Minneapolis June 20th of 20. So I
yeah.
had a big change around then too.
And then, of course, we here in the Twin Cities were in the middle of we were at the center of the country's broken heart, right? It was
Yeah.
civil rights crisis. The city was still on fire all throughout the month of June. We had in St. Paul, National Guard troops with long guns up and down Summit Avenue. When I moved in, it was like coming to a war zone. So when I talk about how the presidency is getting harder, I don't have the perspective of what it was like pre-2020, other than what I saw from my other vantage points. But I hadn't been in the president's chair. But I think since 2020, it's gotten a lot more challenging in a few ways. I think, number one, the ways in which social media are used to pleasure with leaders like college presidents has inhibited our ability to speak freely, because I feel very vulnerable and at risk, literally at risk of death threats, violence. I'm not talking about like at risk of hurt feelings. We all undertake the risk of hurt feelings when we step into leadership roles. It's just the way it is. You're not going to satisfy everybody. I understood that. I didn't understand, as well as I do now, that every time I say something on a controverted issue, the disagreement will not just come back in the form of someone saying, I don't like your decision, or go jump in a lake. It might very well be a threat of violence to the campus, or a threat of violence to me or my family. And I don't think that was true about college presidents as much in the past. I think there was at least a veneer of respect for the role. And if people got mad, you didn't have trolls from all over the country piling on Twitter or sending death threats to the house the way is common now. So that's one way the job has gotten harder, I think, or what's changed. And we saw it come to a head recently with the Hamas terror attack and the military retaliation by Israel in Gaza, where college presidents literally lost their jobs in a very sort of public display of rancor and disrespect for what words they chose and how quickly they chose to speak, and whether they used the preferred adjective to describe this group or that group. So I just think the whole milieu has gotten really fraught. And the idea that we come together in some kind of intellectual town square to share our thoughts, it's gotten much more dangerous in every possible way. And that makes the job more complicated, for
It
sure.
sounds like there's the social media amplification, but there's also the political polarization, especially as you try and create a community of free expression and bringing together, as you were saying, a diverse community in all senses of the word. And that seems like those are two things that make that even harder.
Right. And I will tell you that I reject the line of thinking that says free expression is not compatible with efforts to make people feel included and like campuses are safe environments. I think we're all very capable of both expressing our opinions and being kind about the words we choose. And I think this is just a question of holding ourselves accountable to being decent and compassionate human beings. But it is hard work. And I think we have to be really deliberate about it and assign ourselves as leaders the responsibility to show what it means to be a kind member of a community. So it's a taller order. I think being a college president requires more diplomacy than perhaps it used to in prior years, where you could be alone in an ivory tower and not mix it up with your various constituencies. That's fine. I feel up to that challenge, but I think people have to come into these jobs with their eyes wide open about what it entails. I think the other thing that's changing, as you mentioned, is that our country is changing. So it's not just that the presidency is changing. I
Right.
think our country is changing in the sense that the camps are getting more polarized to the extremes on either side of the political spectrum. And what that means is that people feel most comfortable when they're in an echo chamber of their own worldview or thoughts. And if you are leading an intentionally diverse community, it requires much more thoughtfulness about creating community values or community understandings about what's fair game.
Yeah.
Whereas it may have been that 20 or 50 or 75 years ago, people didn't look to colleges to do that. They went there to get their classes and get their degree and leave and go enter the workforce. But they didn't expect the institution to affirm their identities and help them make friends and provide mental health support. And these are all good things, nice things for us to do. But I just don't think people expected colleges and universities to do that before. So, with the country changing and the expectations of what college changing, it means that what presidents do also has to change.
Yeah, it's such a good point about people are expecting more, because I feel like people are just expecting maybe too much from their institutions and their leaders in a way. I don't know if it has to do with like the secularization of the country, and there's just like fewer institutions that where people can go for that town square or for that fulfillment, but whether it's their boss or their CEO at work and the statements they're looking for them to make, or their college president, it just seems like we're maybe expecting too much of our institutions and their leaders.
I wrote a piece about this in Inside Higher Ed. And one of the things I say in this piece is like, nobody's asking celebrity chefs, what's your statement on issue X? But everybody wants college presidents to comment on everything that happens around the world, whether or not it's directly related to their campus experience.
Yeah. What if the focus was just creating a place that supports the students, and creating a place where people can learn and flourish? And it doesn't have to be taking a position. You can find that position through other means. You don't have to find it at work. In our last minute, I would just love to hear your advice for your peers as they navigate these exciting and tumultuous times and try and enable student success.
I'm going to come back to leading with love. I really think the issue is, how do we meet students where they are to help them express to the fullest extent possible their interests and talents and gifts? And if that is on the basketball court, great. If that is in the library, great. If that is out protesting an unjust law, great. I There's got to be room in all of our institutions for students to bring their full selves. That is to say, not to check at the door something about themselves, to be loved for who they are, and also for us to provide the means for them to really blossom. It's such an incredible privilege to be able to take 4 years to work on yourself and figure out what kind of adult you want to be in the world. And if you look at the data, it's really only something like 37% of Americans that have a 4-year degree. And that number hasn't really budged since after World War II. It's a shockingly small number if you think about it. So if students are going to get this privilege, and for many of them, especially for first gen and low income students, it's a life-changing opportunity. It's an opportunity that will change the trajectory of their own life and open up possibilities, but also for their whole family and in some cases their community. So if we're going to give this ladder of opportunity, how do we help students make the most of it so that they really can accomplish that social mobility and contribute in ways that meaningfully make the world better?
I love it. leading with love and helping people along that ladder to get to that high bar, just to maybe mix too many metaphors, but
That's all right.
but thank you, Suzanne, for a great conversation and great insights about enabling student success.
Happy to talk with you.
Thanks for listening to the Connected College podcast. Subscribe to my Connected College newsletter at elliottfelix.com for insights and excerpts from my upcoming book, tools you can download, and special offers. You can also find more information about talks I've given, articles I've written, and upcoming events there. And please support the podcast by rating and reviewing it wherever you're listening. Let's create connected colleges where students will succeed.